Okay, so it's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Hayley Marshall. Hayley Marshall is a PTSTA psychotherapy and is a UK-based TA psychotherapist, supervisor and trainer with 25 years of clinical experience. Over the past 14 years, Hayley has become a specialist in outdoor therapy and has been instrumental in pioneering development in the field. Sorry about that. She's written several articles and book chapters on clinical outdoor practice and is a TA trainer at Red Kite Training in Liverpool. She offers a variety of ecological training courses for therapists at the Centre for Natural Reflection in the Peak District. In collaboration with Giles Barrow, TSTA Education, she's been at the forefront of the development of EcoTA, and today Hayley's presentation is Allowing the Leopards into the Temple, from this new emerging field of ecological transactional analysis. So Hayley, a little ahead of schedule, it's over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm just, as you can see, I'm still wrestling with my computer here, but I am ready. So I'm really honoured to be speaking at the beginning of this TA Open conference. Someone reminded me that in the old days, TA conferences were just simply about TA, so no titles. So it seems like we've returned to the big space that encompasses our contemporary TA practice. And I really look forward to all our wonderful workshops, on this horizon. So embracing this big space, I'm going to cast us off by introducing the expansive world of ecological transactional analysis, so EcoTA for short. And yeah, Harry, have we got the slides up? That's great, thank you. So as we begin, just a quick nod to that slightly cryptic title of mine. Some of you may know that this is based on an aphorism by Kafka, where the leopards keep breaking into the temple and drinking the chalices dry. There's chaos and uncertainty as the leopards keep on disrupting the ceremony. And at first, the ritual is really quite tightly clung to, but eventually the temple ceremony adjusts. The leopards are expected and they become an essential part of the ritual. So in the context of this keynote, it very obviously speaks to the fact that EcoTA is a new approach in TA. So it was launched by Giles Barrow, who's a UK-based educational TSTA, and me just last year in the Transactional Analyst magazine. And that article can be accessed on the EcoTA website if you're interested in following that up. So our aim is to wake us up as a community, inviting us to revision TA at a time when climate change and our relations with the planet are big matters of very urgent concern. And Giles and I have already spoken elsewhere about the need to shift our frame of reference from an indoor mind to an outdoor mind, or even to an ecological mind. So we're really looking to effect change throughout the TA community by recalibrating our whole lens to incorporate an ecological perspective. And what that will mean will be that we'll account for the natural world in our sense of how we know things, how we conceptualize that knowing through our theory, and how we practice clinically as therapists, educators, coaches, and organizational consultants. So it's really cross-field. And I'll be speaking to you today from the perspective of my native professional landscape, which is the psychotherapeutic. For the past 14 years of my practice, I've been really passionately interested in how we can make space for the outdoors in this kind of work. So allowing in the leopards with all their wild magnificence and learning to run with them. So much of my presentation is based on my own clinical experience and explorations. So this has involved working outside week on week, whatever the weather, both internal and external. It's knowledge gained from my outdoor clients, supervisees, and participants in training groups. It's also come from the many outdoor facilitation experiences and peer supervisory conversations I've had with my outdoor colleagues. Essentially, though, this learning has come from a very deep connection with all the wonderful places that I've worked in. And of course, the journey has been deeply personal. Like many ideas in human relations work, EcoTA is strongly rooted in my own story. So let's just rewind a bit, and I will share some of my journey to give you a sense of how I've arrived here to be talking with you about leopards and to offer some context for what's to come. So my first encounter with ecological work came when I decided that 12 years sat in a chair inside a room was quite long enough. My body was suffering, so I was having kind of back issues, and I felt a strong impulse to get moving. And it was coupled with a curiosity about how to help others access and transform very deep aspects of their experience. I felt that the work I was doing at that time, although it was effective, I felt that change often, people were struggling to make changes on those deeper levels. So I was also looking for something in my professional world that could speak to my important relationship with nature as well. So that's quite a combination. So I went on quite a search really for something that would meet those needs. So eventually my search led me to what was called a wilderness immersion experience up on Skye. And the trip focused on an experiential exploration of what was called wilderness therapy, led by two therapists and an outdoor guide. And I have to say, I'd never heard of it, and it was a real leap of faith. So it involved us living and working as a group, all within, as you can see here, a really majestic Scottish landscape. And a classic example of the process on the trip was our rather turbulent journey around canoe. So this was on the way in. So we were canoeing here around a headland where the sea had become a bit rougher than anticipated. And I confess, I'd never canoed in my life. So this was brand new for me. It was a real adventure. And I'm the one in the front in this canoe, first time out with a real expert, fortunately, behind me. But in the group, you can see a few others. There was quite a collection of canoes. What this part of the trip did was generate quite a lot of anxiety, understandably, and anger, as people made some really direct contact with some very powerful personal processes. And at this point, we're just having a rest halfway around just to kind of gather ourselves in the middle of that. So in this unpredictable experience, what surfaced for me was my intensity with my relationship with my own fear, basically. It took the form of trying to be physically very capable whilst hiding my really deep terror of not living up to the expectations of others. So that was my script in TA terms, really coming alive. And after the canoe journey, we ended up camping at a clearance village. This is us just coming into land. So this is us coming into the place where we're going to camp and live and work as a group. So for those who don't know, in parts of Scotland, there are ruins of whole 18th century settlements where people were forced off the land by wealthy landowners to make way for sheep. So in terms of the group, even before we knew where we were, members of the group were expressing sadness. The landscape seemed to hold such a deep sense of absence and grief, and it put people in touch with their own grief about more personal losses. And alongside that, there was anger and distress about the global relationship with the environment, because on the way around we'd encountered fish farms, and so it's very strong, kind of literally the stench of fish farming. So notice here that on this trip there's kind of a full intertwining of the global and the personal stories of both human and more than human. So a kind of ecology of stories. And although I was disturbed by the immediacy of this whole experience, I confess I was amazed by its richness and knew completely that this was the path I wanted to pursue. It was life-changing. What stood out most was the mixture of a strong sense of connectedness and enlivenment. So I really noticed how our personal stories and life scripts were lived out, so embodied in real time through an encounter with those stories held in the natural world. I also witnessed how working out in nature promoted a real deep interconnection with nature and the setting. So it was a process of encounter, an encounter with aliveness in all its forms. And in my mind at that point, this appeared to offer a new kind of therapeutic forum for both people and the land to be heard. So I felt I discovered quite an exciting in-between space whereby the profoundly human internal and the more than human external worlds met. So it felt intensely creative, really creative space. So those insights gained were my leopards, if you will. So on my return, I set about moving my practice outdoors with the support of some great minds from the TA world, including Keith Tudor, who, catching my fervour for this new way, offered me a sort of an impromptu kind of outdoor supervision. So it was a new departure for him. The timings actually went awry, and we ended up doing supervision on a bus back to his office. And to be honest, that only added to my conviction that this was the path I wanted to follow. So just before we get much further along the path, I just want to offer you a bit of structure, just so you know kind of where we're heading. So as the keynote unfolds, I'm going to speak with you about EcoTA, focusing on the insights from that immersion trip. And although there's much to say about outdoor working, today I'm going to share my thinking about the themes of interconnectedness and enlivenment, and offer you a picture of what my ecological practice looks like. About halfway through, so probably in about 25 minutes or so, 25 minutes, I'm going to invite you to take your own pulse around the material by offering some outdoor reflection time. So we're going to allow in the outside to this keynote. And at the end, there'll be some time for questions. David's going to field some questions. So just to begin, some more introductions. The roots of my outdoor practice obviously come from that immersion landscape. And it's true to say that significant places are central to the way I practice and think about ecological TA. Another really important one is Lightwood, the place I work in with individuals and small groups for both supervision and therapy. So it's a large area of open access land, so that means the public have access to it, in the Peak District in the UK. As you can see, it's very varied terrain, and I work here for that very reason. It's brimful of life, both the human and the more than human varieties, and it's a place where stories of all participants in the work can come alive. So there's both old and new shapes in those stories, but some development. And everything that happens here during a session is potentially relevant to the work. So that's really the heart of ecological practice. And into this place, I'm going to introduce to you an outdoor client, just offering you a short case vignette. So I'm going to read that through so you get a flavour of what this work might be about. My client James and I are climbing up to the top of the wood. It's warm and it's raining quite hard. I'm monitoring the terrain as it's quite slippery. James is talking about meeting the demands of a particular person in his workplace and how overwhelmed he's feeling. He's talking really fast and we're climbing up at quite a pace. In the midst of that, he's also saying how unhappy he is. On the way up, we pass a dog walker who recognises James and stops to say hello. James stops also to engage with the dog and then begins laughing with the owner. I witness how quickly he switched to accommodate this other person and wonder about his script process. We emerge onto a flat and very open field where there's a large flock of sheep. We now come to a halt amid the sheep who are grazing, seemingly undisturbed, even though James's talking seems to have become louder as he begins to fantasize about the likely outcomes of his work situation. A bit out of breath from the climb up, I notice some sense of panic rising in me and feel like I should start saying more. I ponder the links between that and James's response to his mother's panicky demands, but I keep that to myself. At this point, I become more fully aware of where we are and who else is there with us. I recognise in that instance that no one else is panicking. We're among the sheep, they're quite calm, steadily moving around, just grazing. I really notice the contrast in pace between James and these sheep. I breathe in the smell of grass and sheep, feel my feet on the earth, and then almost seem to feel part of the flock somehow. I notice I'm feeling calmer. I'm just going to interrupt you, James, I begin to say, but just at that moment, I'm interrupted by a loud cronking as a large raven emerges from the trees and flies out directly over us. We both look up, captivated and interrupted. James takes a big breath in and out, and then turning towards me, he begins to cry. The sheep carry on grazing as I stand with James whilst he expresses what he's feeling. So alongside this, I'm going to offer you the definition of EcoTA. EcoTA is an approach for understanding human and more than human experience that is forged in connection with the ecological context in which it occurs. Furthermore, this interconnected process incorporates the embodied agency of both human and the more than human participants in the encounter. It is, to be more succinct, the practice of TA in alliance with the earth. So in that vignette, the sheep, the raven, James and me all have our part to play in what unfolds. There are many significant elements. And just notice that as a practitioner, I position myself not as being apart from, but as being a part of the place we're in. So what I want to emphasize at this point is the first part of the definition, which is the interconnectedness of all that was present in that place at that time. So interconnectedness is my first theme, and it's fundamental to EcoTA. It's encapsulated in the definition, which you'll notice is based on a core assumption about the nature of being and existence. So it's an ontological premise, which is that human experience is but one component in a wider system of connections, extending way beyond those simply involving other people. So in this respect, it is systemic, but as it incorporates the more than human, it's better understood as ecosystemic. So in terms of our TA philosophy, this represents a shift and immediately offers us something new, an opportunity to expand our range, developing a progressive, planet-inclusive theory and practice. And as we move into what I'm calling here the wider embrace, it involves us becoming increasingly ecocentric. So this means that we bring our attention to the inescapable fact that we are embedded within the wider web of life. And this quote from David Abram speaks to the value of this position. So David Abram is an eco-philosopher. To shut ourselves off from these other voices, to continue by our lifestyles, to condemn these other sensibilities to the oblivion of extinction, is to rob our own senses of their integrity and to rob our minds of their coherence. We are human only in contact and conviviality with what is not human. So that's taken from David Abram's book, The Spell of the Sensuous, which is a very beautiful book. And if you're interested in this area, I strongly recommend that as reading material. So one element of this shift is that we'll need to place our humanistic focus of autonomy alongside that of homonymy. where the expression of physis includes the desire to unite with, to belong to, and to participate in the environment. And as we saw with James, from this homonymous perspective, we'll work from the position of being among all kinds of others, rather than being at the center of things, and working not just from, but through an ecological space. And I'll say more about what that means a bit later on. So as I discovered on the immersion trip, this means that we actively work with the fact that our story is intertwined with those of many others, including the more than human. So I want to dig a little deeper into our sense of this embedment in the natural world and investigate what this may mean for our theories. And at this point, I'll offer you another story. So the roots of my interest in working outdoors, in fact, go way back before the wilderness immersion experience. In my personal history, my relating with the outdoor world was incredibly important. I grew up on a farm in rural North Buckinghamshire, and as for many small children, the world of the outdoors was a deeply animate, magical place. Everything spoke to me. So my relationships with the various creatures in the nooks and crannies of the land were intense and really meaningful. My biggest friends were 2 Alsatian dogs, so this is an early sighting of me with one of them. And it was just first nature to me, really, that all beings were my kin. Therefore, part of my sense of myself was a self formed through my interactions with animals and nature. So I learnt to live among all kinds of other creatures, and I still have quite a strong sense of their presence. Another significant aspect of my early story was the fact that when things got tricky in the human world, I could be outside and away, and this I did frequently. There was a huge space available to me, or it seemed huge when I was small, which I could walk off into, accompanied by those dogs. So here was a vast solace, certainly a less pressurized relational space, a place where I could feel less fear. There was a lot going on in the family at the time, centered largely around my father. A charismatic, charming figure, he dominated the family landscape and could descend into a terrifying rage if things weren't going his way, especially intolerant of any kind of vulnerability, either his own or in us. So he took up all the space, and so my retreating outdoors was a way of regulating the chaos, so a way of removing myself from the trouble. And it's clear to me that the trauma of my childhood is very carefully enfolded in my experience of that natural environment. So an eco-TA perspective supports this notion of a self forged within and incorporating the wider web of life. So here again, we're widening our view towards what many eco-philosophers and eco-psychologists name as the ecological self. So this term, originally from the world of deep ecology, holds that the self is always experienced as part of the whole. It's a view that's held in many other cultures, particularly in indigenous societies. If we follow this route, we begin to move away from an exclusive emphasis on the egological self, which is about the human intrapsychic, formed only in the crucible of the human interpersonal. Bringing the idea more fully into TA human relations work, we will need to understand, I think, how a more than human world might sit as part of a psychic structure and process, influencing our sense we have of ourselves as we move around in the world. In terms of existing TA theory, much of the ecological essence of my early story, I think, could be closely captured by Burns' protocol concept. So the real essence of our ways of being in the world, protocol, is the layer of our experience that precedes script development, consisting of deeply non-conscious, sub-symbolic, so it's body-based, implicit memory knowings. So this is a profound terrain. It's the root of our core senses of self. And one that I'm suggesting involves an internalization of the atmosphere of the worlds we grow up in with all their aspects, not just the human ones. So this could involve a felt sense of types of landscapes, plants, animals, smells, etc., all held in the body-mind. These are ecological protocol knowings, deeply held in our implicit memory system, and they're so important because intertwined with experiences of outsideness, we can find all the human stories, both positive and traumatic. So in my story, the internalized positive sense of relating with that farm space also holds those kind of brooding clouds of the relational trouble concerning my father. All of this has significant implications for working outdoors with people. It's been my experience that working through an ecological space potentially offers a very direct port of entry to stories of the past. So if clients have experienced trauma outdoors, use the outdoors as a regulating space in the past, or have relationships that are closely associated with the outdoors, the current outdoor place can become what nature writer Robert Macfarlane calls the remembered landscape. So a kind of transferential stand-in for the landscape of old. And again, referring to my own process, my deftly folded away childhood trauma re-emerged on that immersion trip. The ecological triggers of being in a very active outdoor environment in a farmed landscape, albeit in Scotland, began to set those protocol elements on the move inside of me. So I began to feel that I was again in the kind of unpredictable lands of my childhood. And this time the outdoor space also became a place to encounter that trouble I'd originally moved away from. So the ecological self is also relevant in our more present-centered being in the world. So those ways in which we're constantly incorporating the life around us. And once again, our non-conscious implicit knowing system is important as aspects of ourself reach out like tendrils into the world beyond our skin. Part of this process is linked to the fact that through our nervous system, we're constantly being regulated or dysregulated by the environments we find ourselves in. So in terms of the pandemic, more people have sought out nearby nature, I think highlighting the systemic kind of regulatory possibilities to be found there. This aspect is a significant part of the human-nature relationship. It's tapping into our evolutionary heritage as animals who have an implicit fit with the natural world. Research has demonstrated that we have an innate ability to both be soothed and cognitively restored by natural settings. And another important feature in this present-centered aspect, significant in my work at Lightwood, is the way outdoor spaces are steadily internalized. My clients report feeling deeply held by the land in which the therapy is taking place. So this is a psychophysical and almost psychotopographical process that I relate to Thomas Ogden's interpretation of holding. So in this, the ongoing presence and structures of landscape function as kind of enduring reference points, and they provide a gathering place for parts of the self. And these structures over time can be incorporated into the body-mind as an integrating kind of holding environment. And a related process to that is how people physically locate aspects of their learning, whether it be therapy, supervision, or training. So an embodied insight becomes firmly associated with where it was talked about or where something happened, like spotting an animal, or as with one supervisee, seeing a person dragging their dog up a hill, which has always stayed with her, symbolizing something really important in her process. So they prove to be anchoring moments, and they're located both inside and outside at the same time. And a further example would be in supervision, where supervisees often talk about the same client in the same place, often quite non-consciously, until we notice why this part of the place may be relevant to the client concerned. So all of these features form part of an ongoing powerful attachment process achieved through bringing frequent close attention to what is going on within a patch of land. So this happens through ongoing walking around the place, sitting, engaging with trees, plants, animals, water, weather, and other people. And the process reflects the centrality of what in ECOTA are called embodied participatory knowings. So this is an embodied sensory activity that offers a physical, emotional, and spiritual investment in the place. And through these, the therapeutic dyad becomes inextricably grounded and embedded in its ecological context, as the space becomes a place where parts of the self reside. And the significance of this attachment is well illustrated by what happened up at Lightwood a few years ago, when an international water company gained access to drill into the water table up there. I spent several months working with people in their hurt and anger, with many talking about how it felt like a personal attack. Some became preoccupied with what was going to be done to the place, leading at times to some really direct confrontations with site workers during sessions. So it was very live. Disturbance and passion were high. And again, personal stories were being unearthed in that process too. So interweaving with those live events. So with these processes, I think we enter the domain of what we in TA call the adult ego state. So flowing from that dynamic adult ego state models of co-creative TA and incorporating the capacity of the ecological, I would suggest an even more expansive adult that's an eco state. More an emerging process than a state, the adult ego state is inherently regulating, situating, fluid, and flexing within the context of which it is a part. It is deeply impressionable. The ecological adult provides us with self aspects that are constantly changing, flowing in and out of what's around us in this present moment. And the nature writers and the metaphysical writers like Robert Macfarlane, Ali Dillard, and particularly Barry Lopez, who's wrote a beautiful book called Arctic Dreams. They all attempt to capture this kind of really ineffable experience. Here's a quote from Nan Shepherd, who wrote a book about the Cairngorms in Scotland. Again, it's just people trying to capture the adult eco-state's capacity for various states of consciousness, what Iris Murdoch, in fact, called unselfing. So that's kind of temporary losing of an egoic sense of self within an aspect of the environment. And some authors refer to this as inwardly opening out. So it would seem that our sense of I is far more porous to the world than our existing theories perhaps would indicate. So I think that the ecological development of ego state theory calls for what I'm naming an outrapsychic theory. This is a theory that allows for a sense of I-ness, a sense of self that is located also beyond the skin of a person. So it's quite a watery realm, really, where inside and outside are at times really less clearly defined. And it incorporates the world of what I'm calling the ecological implicit. So this is our non-conscious way of embedding in the world through sensory, animal, other than verbal layers of consciousness. So it's a sub-symbolic sensate world that stretches right through from the there and then to the here and now. So at this point, we're at that stage where it's time, if you'd like to go out and involve the outdoor space near you in the material that you've been listening to. So we're going to reflect on the material from an experiential perspective. So I'm going to invite you to go outside to your nearby space and see what that space has to offer. So it's an important opportunity to make room for other voices in our understanding of EcoTA, and it clearly models what the approach is all about. So it's not an interruption to the keynote, it's actually an integral part of it. I'll just put the exercise up here. So I think we have time for 20 minutes for this. And so the exercise is to go outside carrying a question. And the question is, where am I? So I'm keeping that quite generally quite open, so it's inside of you or outside of you in relation to what you've been hearing. And to see what the outdoor space offers back in relation to that question. So everything potentially is relevant. So you can move around, sit down, it's entirely up to you. And if you hold some time on that, so if you hold a 15-minute slot for yourself to do that, and then spend 5 minutes just symbolizing that experience. So you might want to write something down or draw something or create something if that's what you like to do. Either way, just to kind of anchor what's emerged, if anything, from that time. And then to come back in to the webinar. So just to be clear then, so that we all kind of come back at the same time, once you're outside, I guess you're probably going to get started just after about past. So if we can come back in to start again or to resume at 10:02, that's when I'll start speaking the second half of the speech. And just to say, take care of yourself while you're out there. So if you start to get in touch with something that's feeling like you don't want to go there, please don't. Just dose yourself around what emerges. It's always important to look after ourselves and mark the beginning and end of the exercise through what I would call a threshold. So as you go out the door, that's the beginning, and as you come back in through the door, that closes the space down. So it's just gently held. And then when we come back in, we'll give you an opportunity just to feed back in on the chat. Okay, so I hope that's clear. The exercise will stay up on the screen for you to just check in with, just to check so you understand what I'm setting up here. And yeah, go and see what the outdoors has to offer in relation to what I've been speaking about. And I'll see you in 20 minutes. Thank you. Hello and welcome back. Welcome back in. So at this point, you have an opportunity to use the chat, which I actually can't see just at the moment, just to let you know that. But if you'd like to feed something back into the group, just highlights or thoughts that have come up from that bit of time, just so we have a sense of what's come back in from the field, if you like, please do feel free to do that. And you'll all be able to see that sort of kind of scrolling up, I guess. And whilst that's going on, before continuing on, I'll offer you a bit of a summary. So I've introduced you to some of the conceptual implications of that wider embrace, so the theme of connectedness. And in this, I suggested a psychic structure that includes some existing TA theory and some newer suggestions in order to start to incorporate the outdoor world. So surfing the winds of your outdoor visit, I'd like to shift us to the second half of that definition. So this is the part about embodied agency, and that will take us into my next theme of enlivenment. And first, I'd like to show you these. And just take a moment just to allow these to kind of land in your body mind. Just noticing what sensations, feelings, and words even surface for you. So the first word that came to my mind when I came across these again recently was aliveness. I can almost smell the animals and feel the movement of their bodies. And these beautifully rendered creatures of the Paleolithic, so it's from the Chauvet caves in France, speak of a time when our engagement with the more than human was clearly really central. I think they tell us a story of living among these animal others. So they really communicate something of what it meant to be human then. And this is the symbolic language of the ecological implicit. So it's full of the stirrings of life at that time. And please do notice that here we find the ancestors of those leopards of my title. And returning to that seminal experience I had on the trip on Skye, you may remember that one element that caught my attention was how working out in the natural world invited and supported a sense of enlivenment. And with this term, I'm meaning the experience of aliveness in ourselves and all kinds of others, and the fluid relationship between the two. And in ecological terms, this is a coming alive of what it means to be a living thing amongst other living beings. So connected with this is our experience of agency, so making something happen, growth and transformation, that in TA we might refer to as physis. And in line with homonymy, this includes our interest in these elements in other living things around us too. So all those elements, we're going to be interested in what's happening around us. So my experience is that the natural world is an inherently enlivening space, and that enlivenment is one of the single most important aspects of ecological practice, as I think it underpins many others. Once outside, the physical container for human relations work is a range of dynamic and living processes. So this is obviously very different from the more static setting of a room. The setting automatically calls for a sharpening of the senses, so a kind of organismic sort of switching on, and it involves a more active level of engagement for both practitioners and clients. Many people report a sense of aliveness as they relate with the world around them through an increased sensory interaction. So the vitality in an outdoor space invites a dynamic resonance inside of us that has the power to evoke and support all kinds of important experiences. So this then is human relations work in a vitalizing space, where I think all human participants are effectively being tuned up to kind of hone in on movement and process. And at this point, I'm going to share another case example from Lightwood here. So this is my client Fiona. It's mid-spring, and in a session early in the work, we're walking up the track. Fiona is commenting on how happy she is there's so many trees in this place and how loudly the birds are singing. She's also really excited about the amount of water that's coming over the waterfall and down the clough, owing to the recent heavy rainfall. She says that she feels opened up and alive when she's out here. And I note that I'm also feeling really tuned in to the vigour in the environment. I feel really excited actually about being out here with her today, even though I've just had a session with another client in this same place where I'd felt really rather flat. So it's very distinctive. As well as listening to her, I'm also aware of her style of movement. She seems eager to keep up with me, yet at the same time not quite certain of where to place herself. She keeps trying to turn sideways and adjust her pace to match mine, and I begin to experience a sense of unease and awkwardness in my own body and feel unsure about whether to keep my own pace or try to match hers. And as a result, I'll walk up this path, although enthusiastic, is also somewhat quite stilted. So in this, we see a forging of what I term the vibrant alliance, so that being out in nature seems to root both practitioner and client more firmly in their bodies, offering instant access to the immediacy of bodily experience and all that that may hold. So theoretical support for those kinds of experiences comes from Daniel Stern's Forms of Vitality. So he elegantly portrays how we relate to and make meaning of the world surrounding us through the cross-modal, so that's multi-sensory, languages of movement. He foregrounds the primacy of movement in our basic sense of who we are, arguing that vitality forms provide the fundamentals of our felt experience. So this again is part of our non-conscious world. It's our non-conscious sensing of others, the way that we know who other people are, the way they're moving around in the world. So interacting with nature stimulates and vitalizes this movement domain of our experience, potentially placing the practitioner in a position of not only feeling and understanding, but almost living within the movement signature of the people they're working with. With Fiona, through feeling the vitality of the setting, I also felt a heightened sense of her physical style as we walked. And as a result, I began to catch her movement process through feeling that awkwardness and then a resonance with that in my own body. So I view all of this as an enlivening of what could be called my somatic countertransference, so my internal body sensing through the sensory contact with the setting. It's a really powerful channel for knowing my clients. It's also important to say that working in this kind of quite vital realm also means that people can engage with aspects of the self that are deadened, so as in dissociation or depression, and begin to bring these alive through experiencing them kind of more keenly. Dissociative outdoor processes are particularly intriguing, as with some people, the natural world appears to be a dissociative space, again, part of a psychic structure. So I've written more about this in my chapter in a book called When Words Are Not Enough. So it's a book about trauma and the creative therapies, and I think you can get that in the online bookshop here. So in summary then, the stimulation of this body and movement domain offers us a dynamic access to the ecological implicit, which will contain both protocol, so that's more about the past, and adult eco-state, so here and now, elements. So as we're heading in more towards the end of my time of speaking, I want briefly to shine a closer light on the effect of all of this on the helping relationship. Of course, it is possible that working out in nature could easily be a translation of an indoor approach outdoors. And many people, of course, do practice in this way. And there's been lots more of that since the pandemic has happened. People are wanting to work face-to-face with their clients, and so have been outside. But if we embrace the notions of an embedded ecological self and enlivenment, it's clear that there's potential for some really expansive shifts in relating. So returning to my opening case tale of James, we can see that an ecological practitioner clearly has an expanded role. In that work, if you remember, I was monitoring, amongst other things, the physical terrain, our pace, our position in relation to each other, and eventually the sheep. I was monitoring other animals like the raven, other people, because of course we stopped to talk to somebody. I was also monitoring my internal process or countertransference. I was monitoring how James was moving, noticing what that might be about, where his attention was, the weather, because of course it was raining, and what he was saying, and the time. So you're very much working with time and space in ecological practice. So all of these elements were potentially influencing the therapy, with both James and I relating with the other living elements in the setting. So it's a really dynamic ecological relating, where practitioners are working within quite a complex field of sensation and subjectivities. And with this omnidirectional approach, it's clear to me that we move well beyond what are known as the relational two-person psychologies. So put more simply, the helping matrix is expanded by the presence of nature or the outside in what I term here the living third. So I've just offer you this basic diagram, which is very simple, but it offers a framework to show that nature is constantly influencing all the human elements all the time. So that's the big green ellipse. Much of those on those non-conscious levels that I've already mentioned. It also forms quite a discrete element in the relational process, where both participants have their own more explicit relationship with it, either as a canvas on which to project, or as a variety of significant others with which to come into relationship. So in my practice, many examples of the latter occur with the tree in this photo. This large beech tree at Lightwood is a really significant presence. It brings a powerful sense of otherness. Many clients working out here have formed a really distinctive relationship with this being. The tree for some is a stimulus for internal process. So like the client who said it reminded her of being a small child walking beside a large person who was all height and legs. And that really took her into a very powerful memory from her history. But the tree, of course, is also itself. It's a self-willed being that's doing its own thing for its own reasons. And it's a being that's very different from us. So many have marveled at it. The fact it's been there for so long, and a being that's many people have drawn solace from, so needing to go and be with it for comfort and support. And returning to the diagram, those other overlaps may become important at different times, or even form the kind of dominant way of working. The shaded middle, so the real heart of that diagram, symbolizes the ecological heart of an eco-TA practice, where all elements are being accounted for. So that will be working through an ecological space in the way that I was talking about with James. So as an ecological practitioner, at any point, you could be facilitating the client's relationship with nature. So that's one of those overlaps there. They would be witnessing yours. You're both being witnessed by the natural world. You'll both be drawing upon a vast animate space that offers very rich embodied metaphorical material. And at times, as in the story about the water company, all of this could lead to some really quite direct action on behalf of the place that's so dearly held. In this inherently less predictable space, what is certain is that you, the human practitioner, are no longer the only one who has impact on the client's process during a session. So as we saw in the work with James, the nature or the living third is there with its own agency. We couldn't have predicted that the raven would fly out just at that very moment. Things happen in the natural setting that really are beyond you and will influence what the client receives. So you are working as part of a broader conversation. Always mindful that parts of this will continue when you and the client are no longer there. So you may return to find things have happened in the space, and that's frequently the case. And I want to add just a brief word on the impact of the added space between the two human participants in this expansive relational field. Many people experience the natural environment as a less pressurized relational space. If you remember, that was also my experience in my history. And it's remarkably common, especially for people who actively seek out outdoor working in therapy terms. And if it seems that nature offers a kind of relational green cushion concerning the intensity of being with another person. So that's why many adolescents, for instance, find it easier to engage outdoors. The intensity of the human gaze is ameliorated by the presence of nature. There's someone else there to focus on. There's an option of face to place rather than always face to face. And this appears to offer space to connect with internal experience that can easily be lost in the indoor human-to-human encounter. And of course, it's important to say that the reverse can also be true, that experience can also get lost outdoors. So there's some, it's important to recognize that we have to monitor what's happening. So it should be clear by now that ecological practitioners are a mixture of guide, witness, embodied participant and steward of the spaces, both internal and external. And as a result, we need to do our own ecological work to build our capacity to hold such a broad space. And a quick nod to the practice frame here. Outdoors, certainly the therapeutic frame is a uniquely portable one. No longer relying on the walls of a room. We invest a lot in the walls of a room to hold our practice space. It's only when that's gone that you realize just how much we've been doing that. So contracting for a less predictable space requires a real fluid finesse. But the aim, I suggest, needs to be to develop a practice space that offers some sense of a kind of enshrined space for holding and containing, whilst at the same time allows for the aliveness of ecological encounter so that you don't close all that down. And this kind of ecological sensibility only comes through a cultivation of personal ecological practice. So on my trainings, I recommend that practitioners spend a lot of time in the place they intend to work in. To become embedded in a place takes work, spending time getting to know that place on a small scale, witnessing what lives there, both in us and in the more than human realms. And this is part of working through a space. It's like once you need to get embedded in it in order to do that. And through that process, we will develop our own personal grammar of animacy. So it's a beautiful phrase by Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's about learning the unique punctuation and syntax of the place that you work in. And then, of course, you'll relearn it as each unique working relationship takes up residence. So the broad healing aim of eco-TA practice is the development of an ecological capacity and of a knowing of one's place in the scheme of things, to be able to live well in a world of others, both more than human and human. How we in the West regain the knowledge of those cave painters. This is a healing practice for both earth and person, and so is clearly relevant to the wider issue of our relationship with the planet and climate change. So to conclude, TA has developed over the years to attend to more and more complex aspects of our troubles. What Giles and I are hoping will become the ecological turn in TA invites us to turn our gaze outwards and include the fundamental trouble of how we live in relation to our living planet now in crisis. It can't any longer just all be about us, ignoring the significance of the voices of those more than human others, those leopards. How we allow them in will involve all sorts of changes, including considering the ecological in our trainings. Giles and I run EcoTA trainings, but rather than it simply being an add-on, my hope is that over time we can flush through all trainings with ecological philosophy and include working outdoors as part of the norm. Other questions going forward are going to include things like how we make space for ecological thinking, ethics and practice within our exam system, including ecological justice in our written exam questions, for instance. And I certainly look forward to the day when CTA exam tapes include the voices of the earth and are a regular feature. Currently, Giles and I are writing a book about EcoTA for the New Innovations in TA series with Routledge. So much of the material I've presented here will be in that. And we're co-editing a special issue of the TAJ in 2020. So things are happening, and there's a sense for me that we're now pushing on a really quite open door, which is good, because we really hope you'll come and join us in the development of this new approach. This is an exciting, urgent time, and there's much to discover. So that brings my presentation to a close, and it's been a real pleasure to share this with you, my TA colleagues, even though I can't actually see you. And I look forward to conversations with many of you in the future, possibly around a fire somewhere. Thank you so much for your attention, and I really wish you a vibrant conference this weekend.
Hayley, thank you very much on behalf of everybody that can't. Thank you in the normal way by applauding your fantastic presentation, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And obviously during the break we had a bit of a chat about some of the things that I was keen to find out more on. And we have a long list of questions in the chat as well, which Harry's in for us.
Thank you, everyone.
So, I mean, one of my first reflections was that you mentioned supervision with Keith Tudor, and I was wondering where EcoTA is in terms of development worldwide. You know, not just here. Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, I don't know everything that's going on around the world. I know bits and pieces. So, I mean, Keith obviously is based in New Zealand. You know, he's really interested in this whole area and has gone on to write about it himself and host things over there. So I know that he's very active on this, you know, in the kind of outdoor front. He's very keen on the links with the Maori community there. So he's, yes, he's gone on from the days of working on a bus. He's developed somewhat since then. And I suppose the other thing I can tell you is that, you know, people have come on the courses that Giles and I have been running, because some of those have gone on, well, they've gone online for obvious reasons over the past year. And we've had a lot of international interest. And so, you know, people have come on the courses who are living in Guatemala and you know, in parts of Europe. And so those people are taking away the ideas and starting to use them in their own way. And I'm sure there's lots and lots of other things going on that I don't know about. But what I do know is there's a lot of interest, you know, and excitement coming back. The ITA has now got climate change committee. I think it's a committee. Yes, group. That's it. That's the word. It's group. So that's very international. So you know, the tendrils of EcoTA, although we only, in effect, started it as a named thing last year, have really spread quite swiftly, I think.
Yeah, so one of the questions from Andy was, could you comment on whether you see this as a new school of TA?
Hello, Andy. Yes, a great question. I noticed my reluctance to start turning it into a school. There's something, I don't know, quite sort of fixing about that. And as you know, EcoTA is a lot about fluidity and flexing. And so I think generally I tend to think of it much more as an approach, you know, and I think more of a kind of sensibility, I suppose, which is kind of what I was saying at the end of what I've just been speaking about. I think there's something very positioning about a school somehow, you know, and I think it's probably a gathering from the way I speak about this work. You know, I'm much more of a fluid animal. Giles may disagree, but I suspect not. You know, I think in terms of when we wrote the article, that was something we did think about. Of course, other people may decide that it is. You know, we don't have ownership of this. We've just happened to have been the ones kind of ushering it in, really.
Certainly, when you were introducing, I was thinking very much about the links between lockdown and locked in. You know, most of us in the UK have spent quite a lot of time in the last 12 months being locked down, being told to stay at home, don't go out, to not actually be in contact with our outdoor environments, whatever they might be. And I think there's a really strong metaphor, isn't there, for the work that we do in terms of helping people to develop and that feeling of being locked down and locked in.
Yes.
So the reconnection with outdoor spaces is something that people are very keen on. I'm very fortunate to live in Cumbria, being 10 minutes away from my favourite mountain, Blencathra, and having a lot of connection going back to my early teenage years with the lakes and outdoor spaces. A lot of the comments that we've had, lots of questions. Jill, for instance, has asked, could you comment on working this way in the outdoor environment? There's another one here. So just give me 2 seconds.
Yep.
So Joe Moores, as someone who grew up in a very urban environment, I can struggle to relate to nature as it's not for the likes of me. Any thoughts on how to build bridges within and without to make more links for me and others?
Yep.
James King said, how might you work in this way in London and other urban contexts when you consider there have been 3 stabbings in my local parks over the last few weeks?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's really important, isn't it, in terms of safety? And, you know, I think what many of those questions speak to as meeting people where they are. You know, it's like actually, you know, many people are working in urban environments as outdoor practitioners. It's really quite common. I mean, I haven't done the stats, but I suspect, you know, it's a very high percentage. I'm well aware that, you know, a bit like you, David, you know, I live in a very kind of beautiful area and I have a particular relationship with nature. Other people will have a very different one and a very different setting. And you have to work within your own context. I mean, that's what ecological practice is all about. And it's not just your external context. Obviously, you know, safety, where your green spaces might be, the kinds of spaces we move around in, you know, the impact on us, we need to work very live with and very carefully with, clearly, if there's safety issues. But there's also the kind of internal culture around the outdoors, you know, which is very interesting. It's like some ecological work never goes outside. You know, you can talk in kind of very ecological terms while sitting in a room in terms of, you know, your positioning in the world and your relationship with your outdoor spaces. I mean, there's lots I could probably expand on that, but I'm pretty keen on supporting people to begin from where they currently are and then start to reflect on, well, if you want to go out with a client, for instance, and they don't have any relationship with the outside, you need to talk from there. You work from there. So there's a kind of dosing of contact. I like Joe's, I think it was Joe said something about, bridges. It's like, yes, attend to your bridge building, as you cross the threshold. And walking down your street, it's possible to do, like Keith and I mean, I laughed when I said about Keith and I doing supervision on a bus, but it was brilliant. I mean, there were issues around certain points where we had to stop talking, for instance, but the environment fed into the conversation, so you can go and do an ecological practice in a street. The only thing I would say is that lots of the research around the regulatory material is very definitely about greenness, green spaces. So urban environments are inherently more tiring on the system. That's been shown to be the case. But of course, that's not true for everybody. Some people have had traumas in outdoor spaces. So as ever, we have to really come to the person and meet them where they are.
What you were saying about the ecological, the third, the other part in this work, I think is just as true on the bus as it was with the crow interrupting your session that you first described.
Yes.
One of the comments we've had is from Sandra, who says, "My road is being relaid. They're creating a firm base and new tarmac, a brand new surface for my journey."
Yeah.
So there's a very positive connection to the environment, albeit not the green environment.
Yes, nice. Yeah, nice. It's a nice kind of image, isn't it?
Yeah. We've had a comment as well from Nicola, who said, "I felt connected and saw myself in the new life which comes in the spring," which I think is about her experience during the exercise.
The exercise, yes. Yes. I mean, again, they're very deep resonances with, time, how time brings change, and the pace of some things that don't seem to change much, like rocks and and how trees move through the seasons. I mean, we are resonant beings, but because we're largely indoor based, especially in the West, we sometimes forget that, I think.
Yeah, and one of the fairly popular news stories, I think, when we first went into lockdown was actually about people calling it rewilding, but it was like the recolonization of our streets. And I remember from my lockdown position, I remember seeing herds of goats and sheep wandering around.
I remember that. Yeah.
In Wales, and the look on their face was kind of, where did they all go? I think a lot of people thought, what a good thing that is, that actually we're being reminded that we're not the only people, we're not the only species on the planet, and that we exist in a much larger system. And I think perhaps being separated from that system has helped us recognize the importance of it. A lot of us are talking about how all of our practices have changed now, our ways of meeting, our ways of informing each other. Our work are changed, possibly forever and for the better. And many of those ways have a positive impact on the environment, because when we're, to an extent, discouraging travel and collection in indoor spaces, so that we're potentially having a positive impact on the environment.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because a lot of our work is taking place online, isn't it? It's like us doing this. Like we were saying in our conversation, ecologically, this is potentially much more sound in terms of that wider picture of the impact on the planet. But then how do we stay kind of alive in this space is something that really, interests me. And I mean, I think it's really important. It's something we're going to need to learn to navigate, because it's not, I don't think we're not just going to switch back again. I hope not. I really hope not.
No, I think a lot of people have developed new ways of working that I think are going to add more rather than being seen as purely an alternative.
Yes, I agree.
I really loved your metaphor about the leopards in the temple as well. And actually, my first thought was that we're the leopards and we're coming in and upsetting things and drinking all the water. and actually wrecking the environment of the temple.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
I see clearly what you've illustrated to us as a way of us potentially changing our spots.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
consider it of our wider sets of relationships.
Yes. I mean, it's a great aphorism, isn't it? Because you can play around with it in all sorts of, different directions. So I really like that. It's a nice one.
Yeah, and I really liked where you talked about where parts of the self reside. My connection to that mountain that I talked about started when I was 14, and there's a very strong connection with parts of my child ego state there. The joy that I see every morning when I look at it.
Yeah,
is a really, really strong and potent connection for me. And I think it's really important for us all to be reminded of the connections that we have to spaces, whatever and wherever they might be.
Yeah, beautiful. Yes.
So finally, comments from Jane. Wonderful, stimulating, heartfelt input, Hayley. Thank you. 2 questions. I wonder how you see the relationship between autonomy, homonymy, and heteronomy. And can you maybe say something more about enlivenment and physis?
You'll have to remind me what heteronomy means. I always there's too many homonymies going on that I start to get confused. So,
and actually, Jane, you'll have to remind us if you can. I'm not certain.
Well, while Jane reminds us of what that is, what was the second part? Sorry.
The second question was, can you maybe say something more about enlivenment and physis?
Well, I think I said probably quite a lot about that already. I think, for me, the enlivening aspect of the work is hugely important in terms of what we learn, I think, outside. I tried to bring that over in what I was saying, but I think, the idea that actually a lot of our learning is very embodied, non-verbal. I mean, of course, that's the case in a room. It's like when you're working, a lot of the work is happening on that other level. But I think the releasing, of a physis kind of centered energy, I suppose, is really evident in outdoor work, even when people are very, very withdrawn and closed down. And, it's a very powerful intervention to take someone into quite a space that's on the move, whether it's an urban one or a space like the one I work in.
Joe's point earlier that I mentioned about building bridges and how do you get reconnected, how do you connect to spaces? I think it was reflected for me in one of the words that you used, which was outra-psychic.
Yes.
Concept of another ego state, which is not parent or child. It's not internal. It's external in a different sense. It's about the world. And I really like that term. It's one that I'm going to be pondering on.
Oh, good. Because I want people to ponder. I mean, the idea is to provoke and, get people thinking beyond what we have already, I think, in some way. And it's all up for grabs. I don't think I've got all the answers by any means. I've just shared what, where I'm at with it all, really.
Well, certainly you've given us a fantastic introduction to EcoTA, which has been very stimulating for me and I'm sure for others as well. Hayley, before we finish, can you just remind us when the special issue of the TAJ is coming out?
Well, the call for paper, what's the word? Deadline for papers is the beginning of 2022. So we're wanting people to write for us then, and then it'll be coming out, after that. So, but that's the deadline. So, if you're interested in writing, please do submit, and we'd love to hear from you anyway. Any because there's an EcoTA website that you can go to, and there are courses. We're running more courses. People are interested in coming on those. And then there's my own website as well. I think the last slide I had didn't get shown. It's got the website addresses on it. So I don't know whether we can put that up just to... Actually, I don't know whether I've still got my slides even. Maybe that's too complicated. Maybe not.
So we can stick it somewhere in the website, and
Yeah.
yeah, we can signpost to it. So there may be a global message from admin to say where the.
Yeah, okay. It's just a bit of signposting, really.
Yeah. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Hayley, thank you very much. To everyone else, networking is now open, so feel free to connect and chat, and workshop sessions start at 12:30. And if you go to the schedule in the reattendance platform, you'll find links to all of the workshops, and obviously the one that you've booked for is the one that you'll have access to. So Hayley, thanks again, and to everyone else, enjoy the rest of your day.